In this video, we're going to take a look at a project written by a junior developer that actually falls short in many different places. From the most fundamental concepts in JavaScript, like variable names and naming conventions, all the way up to broken systems that actually introduce bugs into the application and have to have code written just to patch those bugs and get the thing working. Yeah, there's a lot to go over with this code, and the developer has a lot to learn, which is totally fine because that's exactly why I make these videos in the first place. I make these videos with the goal of becoming better developers, both you watching this video now and the developer that wrote this project, because this is the only way that you're going to learn. You learn by looking at code, seeing what's done wrong, seeing what you can improve, and then you learn so that the next time that you write your code, you won't make the same mistakes again. So yeah, get ready because you're going to learn a lot about React in this video. And speaking of learning about React and becoming a better React developer, if you haven't checked out Import React, which is my free newsletter that's all about React, you totally should, because every single week you get delivered to your inbox really high quality articles about React and everything that is going on in the React world. I have so much fun making the newsletter every single week, and I learn a ton from the articles that I put on there, and I guarantee you that you're also going to learn. If you're interested, it's going to be the first link in the description down below, and bonus points, that link is going to take you to the wait list for my new special project Cause and Code, which I will talk about very soon. So once again, check out the first link in the description. You won't regret it. Now let's get into the code review. All right, so let's begin. This is the repository that we're going to be looking at in this video. It's called Homework, and you're going to find a link to it in the description down below. I have the repository cloned and up and running here on my machine, and we can directly start looking at some of the code inside of this project. Now, this is a Next.js application, which means that we have the app directory and we have server components and all of that. So keep that in mind as we're reviewing this code. I'm going to go here and I'm just going to open up the entry point to the application, which is going to be the main page over here. This is essentially the page that is rendered at the root level of the application. So let's see what we have here. So first we have some metadata here, which tells us a little bit about what this page is actually doing. So this is the rooms page over here where we can create, join, or manage a room. And then we have our main component here, which is this page component here, which I believe is, yeah, it's the one that is being exported here. So this is the component that is going to be rendered on that specific page. Now, right off the bat, there's a problem here. This is in lowercase, right? So this is, I don't know, just all lowercase or camel case, right? This is not following the correct naming conventions of JavaScript and React. I mean, specifically React. Any component in React has to be Pascal case, which means that the first letter has to be a capital. So this isn't like following the most fundamental naming conventions in React and JavaScript. So we can just easily fix that by just making this in a capital P and then doing it here. All right, we want to do this because otherwise this is confusing. If you first look at this and it's all in lowercase, you might think this is just some random function. When it's not, this is actually the main component that is getting exported and used here in this page. Then inside of the body of the component, so here we're getting the session by awaiting the get server session. So we can do this because this is a server component, which means it can be asynchronous. So we can directly fetch stuff inside of the body of the component instead of doing it in a use effect or something similar. This function here, I believe, is coming from next auth. So this is essentially just getting the current authentication state of the user so that we can use it in the body of the component, which we're directly using inside of this function over here, which is a direct call to the database using an ORM. I believe this is Prisma in this case, and this works because we're in a server component. We can do this. We can directly call the database from the body of the component. So we're calling here db.room_enrolled, and we're finding many of them. And here we're only going to find the ones that have the user ID, which matches the one from the session, and that are approved true. And then we're going to include the user, the room, and then inside of the room, we're also going to include the admin of that specific room. So already, I have a couple of things to say here about this function call, but I just want to get through the rest of the component because there's not really that much to go through. And then I will talk about everything inside of this file at once. So then after that, we're getting these joined rooms over here, and then we're going to map over each individual room. And then we're going to render this room component here, and we're going to pass joined room, the room as props. And then here we're checking if joined rooms.length is greater than 0. Then we're going to render all the rooms with these styles over here. Otherwise, we're going to render what I assume to be the empty state with a button here to click or create a room, to click something to create a room. Perfect. That's fine. Now, there's a lot of things here, and before I continue and actually say what those things are, I want you to leave me a comment and to tell me what you would comment if you had this in a code review. I'm very curious to know and then to see how it compares with what I actually will talk about now. So first of all, on the topic of naming conventions, right, over here, this is also not following the naming conventions, right? This is Pascal case, right? This is the same case that the component should have. This is a simple variable, right? So we shouldn't have this in Pascal case. This should be camel case, just like every other variable in JavaScript, right? So again, we can come here and we can just replace this with a lowercase j, right? Because otherwise it's confusing. Why is it a capital case? Why is it in Pascal case when it shouldn't? It's unnecessary complexity. Then moving on here, we also have this let keyword here that we're assigning the rooms with, right? And this let keyword in JavaScript is only used if you're expecting to reassign the value of the variable that you're creating. So these rooms here, if we were to reassign it at some other place in the component, then we would use let, because let lets you make variables that can change, that can be reassigned. But in this case, we're not doing any of that, right? So let here is not the right tool. We should instead be using const, because this is a constant variable. It's not going to change, right? And again, this is fundamental JavaScript concepts that this developer isn't really following. And this is a bit confusing to me because I'm not sure why the developer is doing this, because I did a quick check, a quick skim around the project, and they're not doing this in every single component, right? Most of these things are fine, but in some places we're seeing like let instead of const, or like Pascal case instead of camel, and so on, right? So I'm a bit confused as to what's going on in this developer's head. But again, these are minor things, right? These are just like naming conventions. I haven't talked about any of like the more serious things that could also be improved. For example, going back here to the first lines of this component here, we have this session over here that we're checking here, and then we're passing the session.user.id to the user ID property over here. But notice here that we're passing an optional chaining, right? We're basically not sure if the session is going to be there. It could be there or it could not be there, but we're still passing it as the user ID. So if the session is not here, this is going to evaluate to undefined. So then we're going to be passing a user ID of undefined over here to our Prisma call, which I don't think is what we want, because if we pass undefined here, I'm not sure of the internals of how Prisma is actually working. Either it's going to fetch all of the rooms that have specifically no user ID, right, because we passed it undefined, or it might just omit this parameter altogether, omit the user ID, and might just return every single room in the database, which is, again, I don't think what we want here, right? Because we're passing the session, we're passing the user ID, so we should at least make sure that we have a user ID before we even trigger this fetch in the first place. That I think would make sense, right? Because otherwise it's either an inefficient call or it's a call that is going to return too much data that you don't actually need, and who knows what user experience the user might have if they're not signed in. Again, I don't know enough about the rest of the application to really be able to tell if we're even going to ever enter this page without having a session. Maybe we're doing that check somewhere else, but at least the way that it's looking at right now, this is not efficient and this should be changed. Now, of course, the solution to this is really simple. Just check here and make a guard that if we don't have a session, we just do something else, either show an error or even better, redirect the user to the login page so that they can log in and then they can come back to this page here, and then you won't have any problem. Your session user ID is always going to be there. Right, so something like if, and then we don't have a session, I'm not even going to check the user ID here. I'm just going to check that, and then we're going to import the redirect function from Next.js, and we're just going to redirect here to the login. This redirect function actually returns never, which means that the code is not going to go beyond this line. This acts kind of like an early return statement without you having to manually supply a return statement. So just by putting this here, you can always guarantee that you're going to have a session, which means that you can just remove this optional chaining, and now you're only ever going to run this query here when you have a session and when you have an actual user ID to filter the rooms by. But even then, even with this, it's still not enough. There are still things that I would do here to improve things. The first thing, and this is the obvious thing, we have here some type errors. And specifically, we have some any type here, right? This parameter room implicitly has any type. And the reason why we have this is because this database over here doesn't have any types. It's currently typed as any. And so anything that we do to it, right, this room enrolled is any, this find many is any as well, and then everything that we have here is also any. And this is really bad because you have no type safety, you have no guarantee that you're even fetching something that exists. Right, like I can come here and I can make a typo in room enrolled and there's no error, there's nothing telling me that I did something wrong, right? I can also make an error at any point in all of these fields over here. I can put user ID and then an extra D, And again, nothing is going to throw an error. Now, again, I don't know exactly how Prisma is going to behave with this, but I'm pretty sure that if you pass a column that is not valid, it might throw a database error, right? Because ultimately this gets sent to a database. And if you're putting something that doesn't exist, you're going to get a database error. And that error probably is going to come back here. And you have no type safety, you have no type guarantees that you're doing anything correctly. And if you open up here this database here, this is also something that I'm not really sure about. So here we're accessing the global variable, right? This JavaScript global variable. We're casting it as unknown and then as Prisma, which means that we're attaching the Prisma to it. And then here we're doing DB equals either the Prisma DB or a new client. And then we're just going to set that Prisma here on the global. I'm not sure if this is correct. Maybe this is how Prisma does it, right? In that case, it's fine, but I haven't seen this. I use Drizzle a lot. That's just my preferred ORM when it comes to Node and JavaScript. And you don't have to do this in Drizzle. It's much simpler, right? In Prisma, I don't know if you have to do this, but I don't think so. Like this is how I do it in Cosden Code, my new project that I'm working on, right? So here I have this index.ts. This is in the database utils library file. And here I'm just creating a client here, which is basically creating this Postgres client that comes directly from Postgres. I'm passing it here the database URL. I'm setting it here some optional configuration, and then my DB is basically this drizzle here that accepts this client, and then the schema as well. And the schema here is really important because it's all of these imports from this file over here, which contains all of the models. All of the models in my application are exported here, and they come with their types as well. And so this database here is fully typed, so whenever I try to use it, I automatically get cool type inference on everything that I'm doing. So if I come here to these implementations here and just look at something, so here I'm fetching the, let me close this, I'm fetching the get profile with details, right? So here I'm doing await DB and then .query and then .profiles. This is fully type safe. If I make a mistake here, I'm going to see, well, you don't have a profile, right? Property profile does not exist on type. So it's fully type safe. And then every single property over here, like this ID, this is an actual column. It knows the name of the column. It knows the type of the column. So in this case, it's a UUID. And again, I can't provide something that doesn't exist, right? And this works at every level of my query. And this is really useful because as you're building applications, you want type safety. You want to be able to know that what you're fetching actually exists. Otherwise, you're going to get errors everywhere in your application, and it's going to be a nightmare to debug all of these errors, and it's an unnecessary headache when, again, it just doesn't have to be this way. Right? So again, I don't know the specifics of Prisma, but I'm pretty sure that Prisma has a solution to this and that you won't get all of these any here, which is basically why we're not getting any of these types here, right? So that's, again, what I wanted to say about that. And finally, one more thing that I want to say here is you don't want to do these calls here to the database directly in the component explicitly like this. Now, you can and you should directly call the database in your server components because that's what they're built for. They run on the server, so it's completely secure to talk to the database directly, but you don't want to run the query itself directly. What I would do is add a layer in between, and I would create a utils file, right, that exports individual functions that call these things for you. For example, a function that you could call get enrolled rooms for user, right? Because that's what this is doing. It's getting all of the room enrolled over here based on this user ID, right? And then you have this function take in the user ID as a parameter, and it's going to return all of these things here, but just in a reusable function. You want to do this because I guarantee you this is not the only place where you want to fetch all of these rooms. Maybe you want to fetch them in another component or even in an API route. And instead of repeating yourself by writing the same code over and over again in all of these places, you have one utils function and you just reuse that anywhere that you need to make a fetch. Right, going back here to my project, exactly like this. This is the get profile with details function. This one, first of all, is using the cache API from React, which basically deduplicates the request. So if I fetch this get profile details in multiple components in the same render, it's only going to fetch it once. And I do this because I have multiple components where I need to have the actual profile with the details, right? And so every place that I fetch that is getting wrapped with this cache function, which is different than the Next.js cache function. This just deduplicates to make sure that only one request gets fired per render. And then I'm just making the database call here. This is what the developer has done inside of the body of the component. I'm making it here directly inside of my utils file, and I'm just returning the actual value of that database call, right? That's it. That's all this is doing. I'm not handling any error here whatsoever, and this is important. I'm instead just creating a simple utility function to access the database for me and to put all of the things that I want to reuse in different places in just one really cool place that I can just reuse. And then the benefit of this, if I go here to references, let's see where I'm using it here. So I'm using it here. Maybe this is not quite the best approach. Let's see the other reference. Is it here? This is also not a good approach. Yeah, okay, here. This is a slightly different example, still related to the profile, but now to the profile subscription. So again, same thing, utility file inside of profile subscriptions. This is my database utils file. Here, I just check for the subscription and I return it, and I don't handle any errors whatsoever. If I go here to the implementation, here I'm actually inside of a component here. So this is a React component. I'm actually getting that subscription over here, and then I'm wrapping it in a try catch block. This is my own custom function to just basically not have to write try catch everywhere. This does it automatically for me. And then here, if I have an error, right, I'm going to throw an error here, capture it, right? Capture my message, and then I decide what I want to do here. Do I want to throw an error? Do I want to render a different component? Do I want to redirect the user to some other place, right? I'm completely free to choose whatever I want to do based on an error of this utility function here. And this is the way that you want to do this because it provides you the most flexibility. Because look, this utils file here, if I made the error inside of this file here, then every single place where I wanted to use this get profile subscription function would also have and come with the same behavior of the error, which is not always what I want to do. Again, maybe here I want to render a different component. Maybe here I don't want to capture this exception for whatever reason, right? If I had all of this logic inside of here, it would come with it, and I would have to go into this function and maybe provide some different properties or something just to get the custom behavior that I want. Instead, you follow the single responsibility principle. Everything does one thing and only one thing. This one just creates a wrapper around a simple database call to return the actual data. And then here I have another single responsibility thing, this try catch thing that just basically wraps it in a try catch block. And then based off of that, I decide here what I want to do. If I want to use it in an API endpoint in a different page, I decide there what I want to do, and it's completely customizable and completely flexible. And that's what you want to do instead of calling it directly here like this developer has done inside of the body of the function, because again, this is inefficient and this can run into many problems, and there's no error handling here whatsoever. We don't even have inside of here, inside of the main root, we don't have an error.tsx file. So if there's an error here by any reason, the application is just going to crash, which is not really what you want. It's not efficient. It's not a good user experience. All right. So I think that's enough said about this component here, which by the way is less than 50 lines of code, right? And there's a lot of things that we can improve here. And again, this is fine. This is a junior developer, and that's how we all start, right? We're all here to learn and to improve. And given enough time, this junior developer is not going to make all of these same mistakes again. I guarantee it. Cool. Let's look at this room component here and let's see what we have here. So here we have an interface. Again, this is not following the correct naming conventions. This has to be a capital J. All types, all interfaces also have to follow Pascal case as well. So we want to do that here. But then even looking at the type here, I'm seeing a couple of wrong things already. First of all, why is this type of the room, right, which is basically a database type, or actually the type of this function that is being returned, right? We're returning the user, the room, and the admin. That's exactly what we have here. Why is this defined in the component directly, right? Because I guarantee you that we're going to need to use this type in other places in the application. It cannot be that only this component here actually needs to use this type. Even if, for example, we have to manually type the result function, the result type of this function over here, we should be using that type because that's exactly what it returns instead of passing any here. So at the very least, put this in some other file over here. I just closed it. Put this in like a types file, right? And then just reuse those types in places where you actually need to use those types. And even then, if I look at this here, we actually have some repeated code and some hard-coded code over here. So this user, right, this is an object which has these properties over here. But then if you look at the room over here, we have an admin, which is also a user, and it has these same properties over here. We've essentially duplicated the actual values of the user, right? And we haven't even created a separate user type. So are we not using the user type anywhere in the application? I'm sure that we are. It would be weird if we're not. And if we are, I can guarantee you that we're actually hard coding the same user variables in all these different places as well, right? So you don't want to do this. You don't want to have just one type hard coded and then copy it and paste it over and over again. You want to extract things into different types, right? So even just come here, take this code over here, come here at the top, type user, and then let's see, can it do it? It can do it. And then we're going to replace the admin. Already, this is better, right? Now we just have the same user that we're using in both places. But we can also do it a little bit more. We can come here, we can take the room, type room, and then we can just use the room instead of here, right? So now we have joined room, right? The user ID, the room ID, we have the user, and then we have the room. And this room also has the admin over here, which we lost it. But again, this admin over here, right? But even this is not exactly the way that I would do it, because now you're always expecting an admin with a room, right? And the admin is not part of the same table as the room. They're separate. So ideally, you also want to represent that separateness at the type level as well. So what I would do is I would actually remove this admin over here, and I would do type room with admin, and here we would put room and then admin user, right? And now you have this separate type that you can use independently of a room and only use it in the places where you want to have a room. Right, like this is the general idea. Put things in a reusable place and then separate them as small as possible in individual pieces that you can just compose together in all the different places that you need. This works for the type level, and this also works for the component level as well. You know, I talk a lot about this in my videos. Always create small things, small components, functions, types, whatever, and just compose them together to build a big and complex application. Cool. Let's look at some of the components here. So let's go into, we looked at some server stuff. Let's go into some client stuff. I want to see what we're actually doing here. Let's go into room post and let's see what we have. So here we have the room post component. This is returning a room ID here, which is of type string, which is fine. But what I like to do, and maybe you have a different opinion with this, which is again, totally fine. I like to put here, instead of string, I like to put room and then ID. Now we don't have a room type, right? But ideally we should. We import that type and we specify here room ID. To me, it's a little bit more clear. It's a little bit more explicit. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times, right, you're not going to pass room ID here. Maybe instead you're going to pass ID, right? And if you're passing ID here, you don't immediately at a glance know what exactly this ID is representing. For you to be able to figure out what this ID is representing, you have to look at the context of what it's being passed into. In this case, the room post component. So here you might be like, oh, we're passing the room post component. Okay, this probably is the room ID. But what if this was the room post, right? Now you're like, is this the room ID? Is this the post ID? You're not sure, right? And it's ambiguous. And this might lead you to make some wrong assumption and potentially introduce a bug that you might have to deal with later. And that's generally why I like to put the type over here, right? On top of getting like automatic type safety, you're also explicitly declaring what sort of type this is. And generally for my applications, I like to do this because it just makes things a little bit more clear and it doesn't really have any downsides. The only potential downside, but I don't really see it as a downside, is that now you're tying this component here to the actual database entity, which means that you can't really reuse this in a different place that maybe you want to pass some different room ID. But I would even disagree with that because at the end of the day, your React application is built to consume data from a database, from a backend. And so it kind of makes sense to tie those two things together, right? Now, granted, if you're doing something more reusable, like a library or something else, maybe that won't apply there. But for the most part, for most applications that you and I are building, I think it makes sense to say that we're consuming a backend, and so we want our components to be tied to that backend at the type level. But again, you might disagree with this. Also, another benefit is that if in the unlikely event that this ID ever changes value, maybe it goes from a string to a number, or even more realistically from a string to a UUID, well, because you're typing in here as the actual type, your component is going to work. And if you have any errors in this code here, it's automatically going to get flagged by TypeScript before you run into some actual bugs. If you leave this here as a string, well, if your database type actually goes wrong, then you're going to might have an error that is not going to be so easy to figure out. Again, this is my opinion. Feel free to disagree. This is just a tip that I generally like to say because I think that it makes for slightly better applications. And then what we have here is we have the old classic fetching data using useEffect. This is actually a great example of my previous video that I did where I talked about that in any React application, you're always going to want to use React Query and you should just default to using React Query even if you're building a super small application, or even if you're building a Next.js server application. Because here we have a bunch of server components, right? And we can fetch data on the server, right? So we're calling the database directly on the server. We're checking the authentication state all directly on the server. But even in a server application, you are going to hit a point where you need to transition to the client and perform some data fetches on the client itself. Why? Because you will need to have some sort of client interactivity that a server cannot provide. Like in this case, I'll point you here to these two lines of code, and maybe even just this line of code over here, the page. This is fetching a paginated list of posts. Paginated means that we need to interactively at a later point fetch the next page of post, usually in something like an infinite scroll. If I scroll here, I'm pretty sure that there is an infinite scroll over here, right? So we have a use effect. We're creating this handle scroll event listener, and basically we're going to set the page whenever we reach a threshold as we're scrolling. This is something that you can only do on the client. You can't do this on the server. And so no matter how much you want to fetch on the server, you need to eventually bring that data onto the client and then keep fetching on the client, because that's the only place that you can have interactivity, right? And this is a perfect example of that, although it is a wrong example of how to do it, right? So you should never fetch inside of a use effect over here, because this is the wrong way to do it. This will introduce so many potential bugs. You can see one right here, and you have to write some weird code just to get things working, all because you don't want to use, or maybe fair enough, the developer doesn't yet know about React Query, in which case it's totally fine, but you really should be using React Query for something like this. Because here, right, you have to manage your loading state, right? Then you have to make the fetch request as well. You have to check data.success. Otherwise, you have an error. You have to check the error as well. Finally, you have to remember to set the error here, the loading to false. Otherwise, you might get an impossible state where you have an error and loading at the same time. And it's just so much to manage that why would you do this if you can do all of this and more using one simple hook, the useQuery hook from React Query? And even here, like, look at this, right? We have this code here. Thankfully, it's commented, so we know why it's here. It's to prevent duplicate posts, if any. I'm pretty sure what happened is this developer, as they were developing this use effect over here, which by the way has happened to me many times before I learned about React Query, you actually get, because you're fetching different pages, you get race conditions. You might fetch a page and get the results of another page and something like that. And so what they're doing here is they're creating a set to just prevent any potential duplicate posts. This only happens because you're doing this inside of a use effect. This never happens with React Query because they fixed that solution for you. You don't have to manage it. So instead of, first of all, doing things yourself, implementing and adding so much more work for yourself, and then having to write code to prevent the bugs that you caused in the first place, just use React Query. You won't have to do any of this, and your code is going to be so much simpler. Now, besides that, I also saw some things that I never want to see in an application, like this ESLint here that we're disabling, the React hooks exhaustive depths. You never want to do this. Let me just see what is actually being disabled here. So basically, we're not having loading in posts, right? This is 100% why we have this weird race condition and why we had to write this code here. So not only are you doing things wrong, but you're actually suppressing the things that are telling you, hey, you're doing things wrong. You're like, no, I don't want to listen. I want to ignore ESLint, and I just want to write my own broken code and then just put my own broken patches on my broken code to try to get the thing working that is broken in the first place and I shouldn't have written in the first place. If you have to write this in your React application, if you have to ignore ESLint, it always means that you're doing something wrong in your code. It's not ESLint that is wrong and you don't need to suppress it. It's your code that is wrong. If you fix your code, if you reorganize things around, you don't have to put this ignore ESLint here, and your code is going to work without bugs. If you can't really find a solution, that's okay. It just means that you don't know enough about React yet to see all the different patterns that you could use to fix that. This is a classic junior developer mistake where you just think that ESLint is just telling you that something is wrong when it's not. It's not. Trust me, your code is wrong and you can do something to fix it. I believe there's something similar here, right? Yeah, here we're also missing a dependency array loading over here, right? Maybe in this specific case, it doesn't have a real impact on the actual code. Like if we put loading in here, every time that loading changes, we're just going to create a new event listener. So in this case, it's safe, right? But what's really bothering me here is that although wrong, the developer has not ignored ESLint over here. At least if you're going to do it here and you're going to do it wrong, at least be consistent and be wrong everywhere. Don't choose to be right. I mean, this isn't really right, but don't choose to like not do something wrong here just because why not, right? They did it here in this use effect over here as well, which again is also wrong. You shouldn't be doing this in your React application. Now, in this case, I'm not entirely sure what is going on. This is basically subscribing to an event listener, probably some WebSocket thing, so that when we add a new room, we're calling it here. Again, I'm not going to say anything about this just because I don't know enough about the entire application to see how it's structured to make an educated, I guess, review on this. So I'll just leave this as is. This seems fine, minus the ESLint. Ignore here, but maybe there's a better way to do this. Again, I don't know, and I won't comment on it. And then the rest is basically just some JSX over here, and that's pretty simple. We don't have to do anything, or there's nothing really to talk about here outside of that. All right, so I think that's where I'm going to stop it for this review. I think we covered enough, right? We looked at 3 different files, and there was a lot that we said on each one of these files, which again is totally expected, right? This is a junior developer, so this is completely expected. I've written code that is way worse than this. This is how we start, right? And we can only go up from here, right? So I really hope that the developer, if he's watching this video, that they can use this as a learning opportunity, right? To essentially better their code and not make the same mistakes again. And I hope that you as well watching, you were able to learn from this and maybe take some of the lessons that we've seen here and apply them to your own projects. And I really mean that, right? Like I'm doing these reviews to help the developer that has written this, to make content for you guys as well, but to also help you learn, because maybe, who knows, maybe there's some nugget of information here in this video that you didn't know about and that you're like, oh, maybe I want to do this in my own application. You do it, you realize that this is a better approach, and then it just makes your overall code better and it makes you a better developer. So it's a win-win for everybody. So yeah, if you want to look and play around with this code yourself, again, it's called Homework. You're going to find a link to it in the description down below. Shout out to the developer for submitting this. It's really brave to like submit your code and have it be reviewed on this channel. So again, really great. And I only wish you the best. And I hope that this video was valuable to you in learning how to write better code and fix some of the mistakes that maybe you're not really aware about at this point because you're still learning, right? So yeah, that's all that I have for this video. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine. With that being said, my name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.